Hello everyone and welcome to this complete JavaScript tutorial. This 2.5-hour video was pulled from the Ultimate Web Development course that me and Nick put together on Udemy, and it covers the following topics as detailed in these two sections: JavaScript for beginners and more JavaScript concepts. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to get into front-end web development, I think you'll love this course. So if you enjoyed the tutorial, please check out this course on Udemy. You can get into the course for only $10 if you use the coupon code YouTube. And if you want even more value, on my website, I have a course bundle. It's the Learn to Code course bundle. And you can learn web development, Python, C++, and Angular too. So I'll include links to both of these courses in the description. I'll also include timestamps in the video so you can skip to a particular topic that may interest you. So if you like the video, please leave a like. And if you want to see more content like this, subscribe. So let's get started.
All right, we are going to jump right into JavaScript at this point. So JavaScript is really fun because it is a scripting language, which is, I guess, like a programming language. There are differences between the two, but you can create functions and classes, and there's event handlers and stuff like that. So that is what we're going to be doing in this video. So I'm going to right click on my web course root directory here, and I'm going to create a new directory called JS for my JavaScript files. And in here, I'm going to create a JavaScript file, and I'm going to call it main. And it's going to automatically give it the extension .js. So this is what we're going to be writing our JavaScript in, and you can include it much like you include a style sheet. At the top of the page here, just include your script instead. And actually that's wrong, so I'm going to show you guys the right way. It's generally recommended to include your scripts at the bottom of the body. And the script has a source, or src attribute, and this is the location of the JavaScript file. So in this case, it's in the JavaScript directory main.js. This is not self-closing, so there we go. We've included our script, but we're not going to use it yet, actually. What I'm going to do in this video is we're just going to do a bit of inline JavaScript. And how you do that is you're going to define your script wherever you want it to activate, and then we're going to type document.write, and I'm going to write hello world. And I'm going to save it. The document means the actual document, and write is a method of that. So just to get you guys writing hello world, I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh. And up here where I put that script, you'll see it says hello world. And so that's how to write to the document in JavaScript. Now, if you guys have no programming background, what this basically means is document is an object. And when you write an object, each object has methods and variables that you can print out. So, so the method here that we're calling is write. And a method typically has brackets here, and you can supply arguments to it. So an argument in this case is hello world. It's a string, it's quoted in text, and we're going to be getting into more programming concepts as we go along here. But for right now, all you guys need to write is document.write, and then inside these regular brackets here, you type hello world within quotations. Quotations tells it that it's a string. If we remove the quotations altogether, we're going to get that underline there, and when we write this, or when we refresh, the JavaScript is going to output down here in the console, and it's going to say missing that after argument list. And the reason is because we don't have a comma here, and we normally would if these were variables, which they're not quoted, so the compiler or interpreter is thinking that we're passing it two values, and each one of those values is its own variable, and we're going to be discussing variables as well. For right now, you guys can write document.write hello world, and when you save it and refresh, it's going to print hello world onto the screen for you. And that is the very first step into JavaScript. Now, in the next video, we're going to be learning about a lot of more basic things. We're going to learn about variables and integers and stuff like that. And then we're going to move on to be able to create functions and objects of our own that we can interact with. And we're going to learn how all this relates to the content that's on the page. All right, guys, I'm going to remove this bit of inline JavaScript because I don't typically like working with that. We're going to be learning about comments in this video and alerts and console logging. This is my last video, don't mind that. Refresh here. All right. So basically what we're going to do in this video is we're just going to learn how to use the language. So as you can see up here, when I created the JavaScript file, my IDE automatically added a comment. This is called a multi-line comment, and you create it by putting a / and then an asterisk, and then you can drop down, and it automatically closed it for me, but if it doesn't for you, put an asterisk and then a /. And everything between these two are not going to be interpreted or used at all. So I could say document.write, anything I wanted, I could even, make something that's invalid in JavaScript. It's not going to be interpreted, it's not going to be parsed, and it's not going to be added to our page. We get no error here. So that is a multi-line comment, but more commonly we're going to be using single-line comments. Even if you have multiple lines that you want to comment out, you're going to be using 2 /. Like that. So it's good practice to comment our code. In other words, when we do something for the next developer who might look at it, or if we are coming back to the project at a later date, we want to be able to quickly read through it and not have to read the code itself to understand what it's doing, although it should be written in such a way that is readable. And so we're going to be discussing that as we move through JavaScript as well. But for right now, we're going to learn about 2 functions. So a function is a block of code that does something. We're not learning how to create them yet. We're just learning how to use 2 built-in functions. The first one is called alert. And a function is written like this. Every line, by the way, every line in JavaScript is ended with a semicolon. I mean, it's not right now, because, and it will give me an error unterminated statement, but JavaScript 2016? ECMA script, they released a new version which basically you don't need to add a semicolon to the end of every line. But your IDE or code editor might warn you about that. So for right now, I'm just going to end it with a semicolon. So a function is written as whatever the function's name is. In this case, it's alert, and then an argument list. So we basically pass values into the function through these brackets at the end of the function. So I'm going to say, this is an alert. I'm going to save it. I'm going to jump back over here and I'm going to refresh, and you'll see an alert happens, a pop-up that says, this is an alert. And then I can hit OK, or I can hit up here, it doesn't really matter. This does block rendering and anything else that that's happening on the page. So the next thing, like alert, it's the console itself. So as you saw when we wrote document write, the document was an object that we were performing a function on. In the same sense, we're going to write console dot. And so the console right here is this right here. If we want to manipulate this in any way, and right now we're going to log something out into it, we need to access the object console. And once you access an object by its name like this, you can then put a dot and then access its method. So the console object has a method or a function called log. And the log function can take any number of parameters, but for right now we're passing in one string parameter, and we're going to say this is a log. And I'm going to end that with a semicolon. I'm going to save this and refresh the page. Now you're going to notice when I refresh, until I hit OK, nothing is going to happen to the content. So I'm going to hit OK, and then we're going to see our console log out what we told it to log out. And it says, this is a log. Now you can also use the console itself to write things. So console log hi. As you can see in the console, it wrote hi. So that's the alert and console methods, and we're going to be using those quite a bit. So that's why I'm showing them to you guys first, even before we discuss functions themselves, because we're going to be making functions on our own. We're going to be learning in the next video about all the basics of JavaScript. We learned a bit about the syntax already. We learned how to write a function, and that we need to put a semicolon on the end of every line. So those are very important, but in the next video we're going to be learning about basic types. So a couple videos ago, I had said that if we don't use quotations here, it's going to think we're passing in multiple values, each one as a variable. So when you write a word in JavaScript that is not in quotes, JavaScript doesn't know that that is supposed to just be a string or a sentence, for instance. So we tell it that it is by using quotations. So we're going to be learning a bit more about variables and strings in this next line. You create a variable in JavaScript by using the keyword var, and notice how it turned blue in my editor. And I'm going to hit space, and now we're going to name the variable. So I'm going to name it welcome message. And then you put a space and an equal sign, and you're going to assign a value to be used every time we use welcome message in our code. And so in this case, it's going to say, this is a welcome message stored inside a variable. And we're going to end that with a semicolon. Now, this is a string. It's going to be used as though it were text. This is not. This is going to be used as though it has a value inside of this, but this is not the value. This is called a variable. So what I'm going to do down here, I'm going to alert welcome underscore message. And what's going to happen here is when the page loads, it's going to call the alert function, and what's going to pass into it to, use as the content of the alert is going to be welcome message, but it's not just going to print out welcome message. Is that a capital L? No, it's just how it slanted it there, made it italicized rather. It's not going to print out welcome message. It's going to print out the value that we've assigned to that welcome message. So it's, you can rather than printing out, if we wanted to do this multiple times, we wouldn't want to write this out multiple times. We're just going to, alert that multiple times. I'm going to save it and refresh. And as you'll see, it does print out the value of the variable, not the variable name. So that's what a variable is, and that's what a string is. Now, these are types. So a type is basically what type of type is this? What type is this? So this type is a keyword, this type is a variable, and this type is a string. Let's say we want to create a variable called age, or rather, my age. We're going to set it equal to my age, which right now is 28, I believe. That sounds right. All right, so now notice that I did not put this into quotations. That's very important. Integers or full numbers do not go inside of quotations unless you want them to be a string, which you can't do like math on, for instance. So this is a number. It's a number. Now a float is kind of like a number as well. So let's go ahead and say exact age. I'm going to set that to 28.23. Sounds about right. So what this is is a float. And what that means is it's a floating point number. It has a decimal in it. So if you were writing out $28.23, for instance, it would be 28.23, not just 28. So that's how you would write it in JavaScript. This is a float, and this up here is an integer. And we're going to be discussing those more at some point. But for the most part, these you can play around with these now. And you can actually do math with these because they're numbers, but if we put them in quotations, we wouldn't be able to do math on them. And I'm going to show you guys what I mean right now, actually. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to print my age plus exact age. I'm going to save it. And now when I go back to refresh this is going to print out 56.23 because it knows that it can do that operation on this. It can add 28 to 28 because they are numbers. But what happens when I change both of them to strings, like this, by putting quotations around them and making them text instead of numbers, I'm going to refresh, and it says it's 28.23. And that's because it's just putting those two strings together as though they were this, right? So that's the difference between a string and an integer. Well, that's the main difference, I guess. Another thing is that we can't add an integer to a string. You may have guessed this, and we can't add a float to a string. So I'm going to say welcome message plus exact age. So this should print out, this is a welcome message stored inside a variable 28.23. That's what we would expect to happen. So let me hit OK, refresh. Oh, it did do that. All right. That was an integer. Okay. Was it the console log that didn't work in? No, it did. Okay, so it converts it all to a string now. That's never used to be that way. At least as I'm thinking, we can also separate them by a comma here. And that leaves this as a floating point. So if you need to use that later on, you can. And then we also have other types. You can use single quotes for strings as well, but we're just going to leave it at this for right now. So you guys now know how to create variables, strings, integers, floats, and you know how to call a few functions. So moving on, we're going to be discussing more about basic types and basic things you can do with them. All right, guys, I'm going to remove some of this because we're going to be discussing more about variables in this video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use one variable called my age, and the first thing I'm going to do is print it out. So my age is, and then I'm going to put a space and a plus, and I'm going to print my age. And then I'm going to drop down here, and you can reassign values to variables. Now, to do this, you don't just type out the entire thing again, because what it's going to try and do is create a new variable, and there's already one created, and we don't want to do that. And that's a great way to cause, I guess, excessive RAM usage by creating more variables and objects that you need. What we're going to do is we're going to reassign it just by saying my age, just the variable name, equals 29. And then I'm going to console log my age next year will be this. Now I'm going to save it. And so what we're doing is we're creating a string, and we're adding an integer to it, which makes the integer become a string as well. And this is called concatenation. You can also do this with just two strings. If I wanted to write, hard-coded in there, this would print out as my age next year will be 29. But for the purpose of this video, we're learning about reassigning values. So I'm going to set that to my age. I'm going to save it and refresh. And it says my age is 28. Then the variable gets reassigned, and it says my age next year will be 29. Now another way to do this would just be adding 1 to my age. So this is a bit of math. What we can do is my age plus 1. I'm going to save it. Now what happens here is the same thing. It says my age next year will be 29 because it takes my age and it adds 1 to it. Now if we only want to add 1 to it, we can use an extremely shorthand version and say my age plus plus. Save it and refresh. And it didn't change it, and that's because I stored it in there itself. So save it, and there we go. So basically what this is, you don't even need to write the equal sign or anything. This just increases the number by 1. This is actually a feature that was first introduced into C++, and that's why it's called C++ actually, because this was an awesome feature to be added to it. Well, that's not why it was called C++, but it's fitting that C++ was, as far as I know, is the first language to do this. So that's how to increase a number just by 1. You can also do the same thing in reverse by negative, negative. So let's change that to my age last year would be 27. And so if you're using integers and you want a quick way of modifying the value by 1, you're going to use those. Otherwise, you can set my age plus equals 2. I'm going to save it and refresh. And what plus equals does, this right here is essentially the same as writing my age equals my age plus 2. So it's, you can see what's happening, I hope. Rather than writing the entire thing out like this, my age plus equals knows that we're going to be adding to this directly and storing it in its own variable when we're all done adding to it. So my age now would become 30. So that's a bit more about variables. We need to discuss, I mean, you can do the same thing with text variables. So create a variable called my name. And I'm going to just do that. You can actually declare variables without even assigning a value to it. So this is just an empty variable. And if we try to use it, I'm just going to change this one right here to my name is my name. Save it and refresh. I forgot the plus sign there. Save it and refresh. And it says my name is undefined. And that's literally because we have not defined it yet. By declaring it or assigning a value, you're defining the variable. You're telling the variable what it is. And without that, it is undefined. Which we'll be using some if conditions. We're going to be able to test if something is or is not. And we're going to be learning about that soon, but not right now. So let's go ahead and in the next video, let's cover another type, which is true and false. I think we can actually work directly in the console for now because we're not building anything elaborate. So let's go ahead and write some more code. We're going to be talking about Booleans in this video. So a Boolean is, it's a type. Just like string and integers are types, Boolean is a type that's used for certain purposes. For instance, I mean, you can't really compare different types unless it's float and integer. You can compare those both as numbers, but you can't compare a Boolean like true or false to text. You can't say if text equals or if text is greater than true. Like there's no greater than true. True is just true. So let's go ahead and create a variable called I like cheese. And that's going to be set to true. Now, you'll notice that true it's a keyword. It's a Boolean operator. So it's going to be color-coded like variable in most cases. And it's just a lowercase word. You don't put it inside text, then it becomes a string. But we're interested in using it as a Boolean. And so we can check if something equals something else by saying I like cheese equals true. This will return true because it does equal that. Or does it equal true in text? Now, as I said, true as a Boolean does not equal true as text, because true as text is not a Boolean operator. There's no way to compare the two because they're so different. And we'll talk more about comparisons later on. I just wanted to show you guys the difference between a Boolean and a string. Now, you can also set, maybe I have a bad experience with cheese and I don't like cheese anymore. We reassign by saying I like cheese equals false. So when you're assigning a variable or reassigning a variable, you always use one equal sign. I saw that I used two here, so I just didn't want you guys to get confused as to when to use each one. Two are used for comparisons. One is used for assignments. So now I like cheese now becomes false. These are two Boolean operators, and that's all we're covering in this video, I guess. In the next video, I think we're good to move forward to more advanced things, hopefully if conditions and for loops and stuff like that. Alright guys, so we learned about Boolean operators, strings, integers, etc. We learned how to redefine variables. What we're going to be learning about in this video is how to compare values. So the most basic way to compare two values to check if something is true, and that's what we're doing essentially. We're checking if something is true or false. It's called a truth checking, I guess. And what we're going to be doing first is checking what we've done is we've checked if something equals something else. And again, you can say does true equal true? And it's going to say true. Or we can say does high equal high? It's going to return true. But if we say high equals 3, it returns false because it is not the same. So use two equal signs to compare values and use one equal sign to assign values. So if I said high equals 3, it's going to freak out because it doesn't know what I'm doing there. A string never goes on the left of something. Or an integer. You couldn't do 5 equals 6. An invalid left-hand side in assignment. So basically, it knows we're assigning a value to something because we're using the equal sign. We have a value there for it, but we can't assign that to an integer. We can assign it to a variable. And so if we create a variable called mynum, we can set it to 6. Now every time we print out mynum, it's going to use 6. So here we could say is mynum equal to 6. And that's the most common reason you'll find fact checking or truth checking is to see if a variable is equal to something. So let's say that I have started a website that can let people sign up, and if they choose to, they can purchase a premium service or a subscription. So I'm going to create a variable. Let's assume that I'm a user right now, and my variable is set to is premium user, and I'm not. So let's say we only want to provide a bit of code, or we want to do something special if the person is a premium user. So we would say, we would compare that is premium user, and is that equal to true? And if it is, we can do something, but it's not, so we're not going to do anything. And that brings us into if statements. If statements are basically a way to apply this and do something based on the result, whatever we want to. But we're not quite done with comparisons. We can also compare if something is not equal to something else. So if is premium user is not equal to true, then maybe we'll say, hey, you should buy this, or you should subscribe as a premium user. So the operators to use when comparing if something is not equal to another one is to use an exclamation point followed by an equal sign. And these operators right here means is not equal to. Basically in programming, not just in JavaScript, but in PHP and other languages, the exclamation sign means not. So by combining it here, it's saying not equal, basically. You can also compare greater than or less than. So we can say, is 5 less than 7? And it is true. Now we can also say, is 7 less than 7? It's going to say false. But if I said, is 7 greater than 7? It also says false. So maybe we want to run a bit of code, and I'll show you guys examples as soon as we get into if statements, but maybe we want to compare if a number is greater than or equal to a number. So we would say, is 7 greater than equal sign 7? And it's going to return true because 7 is equal to 7. It's not greater than. You can do the same with the less than. 7 is less than or equal to 7. And that's going to return true as well. So with all that said, let's start writing if statements. And for if statements, we are going to move back to our IDE, and we're going to be running this page every time we want to update it. All right, so in this video, what we're going to be doing is learning about ways that we can then use the variables that we create to do certain things. So I'm going to create a variable here called isPremiumUser. So we start with the var keyword, and then we call it isPremiumUser, and this is going to be false. So here what we're going to do is we're going to create an if statement that basically determines, if this is true, then do this. If it is false, then do that. So what you do to create an if statement, you just write the word if and then brackets, and you open them and close them. And here is where you put your comparison statement. So just like in the previous video, we're going to say if isPremiumUser equals true, we're going to open up curly brackets now and space it like that. So the syntax of this is the if keyword, opening bracket, and then your comparison, and then your closing bracket, and then you open curly bracket, and you can close the curly bracket. And all the code that's going to run if that statement equals true is going to be written in here. So for this instance, what we're going to do is just console log thanks for being a loyal customer. I'm going to save it, and when I refresh this, nothing's printed out because I'm not a premium user. If I change premium user to true and save it and refresh, then it says thanks for being a loyal customer. But again, if I change it to false, it's not going to do that. Now, if you're always checking just what is true, you don't even have to put this part. It's going to do a basic comparison right off the bat to check if the variable is, if it exists and has a value, and if it doesn't. And we can basically shorthand this. If we're checking if something is true, we can erase all that and just type if, and then the variable that would either hold true or false. In this case, it holds false, so it's not going to do anything. But if I write true here, save it, it's going to do this. Now, this will work if a variable exists. So if I create a text, a string that says false inside it, and refresh, it still prints that out because it's basically saying if isPremiumUser. And it exists, and it has a string, so it equates to true. We're going to leave this false, actually. And down here, after we do the if statement, you can do an else statement. And directly after the closing curly bracket here, just write the keyword else, and then open up a new set of curly brackets. And now this is going to be run if isPremiumUser is not true. So I'm going to write this out the long way just to simplify things here. So if isPremiumUser is equal to true, then it's going to do this bit of code. Else, it's going to run this. So console log, you should subscribe to our premium service. Save it and refresh. Where it is false, we see you should subscribe to our premium service because we've set isPremiumUser to false. So what is happening is it's saying if premium user, then do whatever is in here. So the compiler or the interpreter doesn't even parse this code here if it is not true. It says if this is true, then do this, but if it's not, then run this. So for instance, we could put a variable in here that doesn't exist, and it wouldn't freak out or anything because it's not even parsing this code. But if we set this to true, it's gonna freak out because it's gonna say it's not defined. We haven't defined this. So that was just to show you guys basically that it only reads, I guess, what it needs to. I guess that's the easiest way to say it. Now we're going to create another variable, and we're going to learn about else if. So if, else, if, else. It's going to make a lot more sense once I write this out, so just bear with me. My age is going to be equal to 28. So what we can do is we're going to create an if statement, and the comparison here is going to be equal to, or less than, rather. So if my age is less than 1, then we're going to open up our curly brackets, and we're going to console log you are a baby. Then what we're going to do here, instead of just writing else and then opening up curly braces, which is kind of like a catch-all, we're going to write else space if, and we follow the same format. So my age is less than 3. Open up your curly brackets, and we're going to print out console log. You are a toddler. And we're going to do this a few more times, so get into practice of it. I'm going to walk you through a few more times just to make sure that we covered it very well. So after the closing curly bracket of the previous step, you're going to write else if, and you're going to open up your brackets. My age is less than 10. We're going to say you're a big kid. Else, if my age is less than 19, actually we're going to say less than or equal to in this instance because 19 is a teenager, and we're going to print out you are a teenager. And we're going to do 2 more. So else if my age is less than 40, we're going to say you are an adult. Else console log you must be old. You're not in our records. Save it, and then I'm going to run this. It's going to print out that I am an adult. So what happens here, it might look that my age is it's greater, so it's not less than 40 and it's not, else. What I'm going to do is change my age to 4. I'm going to save it. I'm going to refresh, and it says you're a big kid. Even though my age is less than 10, which is the condition it's capturing here, it's also less than 19, but it's not printing this out. And my age is also less than 40, and it's not printing this out. And this is because it stops at the first one where the statement returns true. So in this instance, it says, is my age less than 1? No? Okay, move on. Is my age less than 3? No? Move on. Is my age less than 10? Yes. So what's between these curly brackets? And then it reads that and it prints it out, and then it stops. It doesn't parse any of this after that. So you're going to have to write these in a certain way so that they make sense. There are instances where if you write it the wrong way, the wrong thing is going to happen. And I'm going to try and think of an example before I start the next video so that I can show you what not to do, so that you're always going to be writing these correctly. So that's an if statement, and how to do a very basic one to check if something is true or false, which we're comparing an equal sign. So then we also compare an integer to hard-coded integers. This is something that you don't want to do. You don't want to ever do it backwards. If 1 is greater than my age, print out you're a baby. Meaning that this would return true if my age is anything less than 1. But this is written backwards. We call this Yoda code because in Star Wars, Yoda talks kind of backwards. So you never want to write it like this. You always want to, you're going to compare something to something. So the thing that we're comparing is my age. That always goes on the left. So yeah, that's if statements, and else if and else. We're going to be learning more about these types of loops or conditional statements, we call them, or rather just bigger chunks of code. That's a better way to put it. We're going to be covering that more in the next video. All right, so what I'm going to do is we're going to move on to for loops. So a for loop is a way to do something repetitively until a certain threshold is met. So we're going to create a variable called do until, and this is going to be 5. And we're going to create another variable called, let's do this all in one. So for, and then we open this up. We set the initial value, so we're going to set I equal to 0. Put a semicolon. We're going to say this is the condition that this for loop is going to run until something becomes not true or until this statement becomes false. So we're going to say I is less than 10, and then put a semicolon, and then the next one is what's going to happen after the loop is done. So we're going to say I plus plus, which means we're going to add 1 to the I variable. Let's create that like that. There we go. Now I'm going to print out just I. So let's go ahead and console log current I value is, then I'm going to put a comma, and I'm going to print out I. Now, I'm going to save this and refresh. And as you can see, it repeats that for as long as this variable, here's the conditional statement, is less than 10. So again, what's happening is the first loop through, it's going, okay, let's print this, I equals 0. Then let's add 1 to I and go back through this. Is 1 less than 10? Yep, so print that again, and it prints out 1. Let's add another to I, so it becomes 2, and it says, is 2 less than 10? And it continues that until this statement becomes false. So if I put, this is going to do nothing essentially because we haven't initialized I. It doesn't even run once. And that's a for loop, so you can do something multiple times. And this is a very basic and an essential bit of code right here. You're going to have to know how to make for loops to repeat something over and over. Because we don't want to repeat things over and over. We want it to be a little bit flexible and run however many times it has to. So that's why we do this. And by the way, you can name the I variable, you can name that anything you want, but you have to use it consistently here. If you change this to K, then you need to check K against, the truth checking there. And then you also need to add 1 to K. Not I. So that is a basic for loop. In the next video, what I want to get into is maybe putting a few things together and creating functions. Hey guys, welcome back. This is the big video on functions. So when I say function, what I mean is it's a block of code that's not run, but that you can reference in your code to have it run. And you can supply it certain data as you do so. Now that explanation might seem a little obscure, so let's just jump into it. Much like when you create a variable, you use the keyword var. When you create a function, you're going to use a keyword called function, and then space. And here you're going to give your function a name. So for instance, mine is going to be my var. You guys can name this whatever you want. At this point, once you have it named, you need to open up and close your curly brackets, and then you can put arguments in here, and we're going to talk more about that later. But for right now, on the right-hand side, at the very end of the line, as of this point, after the closed brackets, open up the curly brackets and close them. This is a function. Right now, this function is empty, but you guys have written a function. So let's make this not empty. I'm going to console log, my name is Nick. Now I'm going to save this and refresh our page here, and nothing happens because we didn't call the function. So this is defining a function. This is building a function, but then to call the function, remember when we alerted information on the page? When you first loaded it, we called alert. That's how you call a function. You just write the function name. I actually named it my var. Let me name it my function. So down here, I'm going to call the function. And by calling it, I mean I'm going to tell it to do its thing, to run. So I'm going to type my function. And then we're going to open and close the brackets. And there's no parameters to be passed in here. It's just a function in and of itself. So I'm just going to end the line with a semicolon. Now I'm going to save and refresh. And it prints out my name is Nick because I've told it to right here. Now, when I say arguments, you can actually pass an argument into that. Let me erase this. Let's create a new function called print name. And so we're going to take in one variable or one bit of data that we're going to reference inside of the function as a variable, and it's going to be name. Now, open up and close your curly brackets, and in here, we're just going to print out hello and then name. So console.log, and here we're going to open up quotations, hello, and then a comma. And then outside of the quotations, instead of concatenating it with a plus sign, we're going to concatenate it with a comma. And it's not really concatenation. It doesn't make it the same thing, but it prints out both of these, one and then the other. So like that. Now, by using a comma, I don't have to make sure there's a space hard-coded at the end of that line. This essentially adds one. So down here, let's call print name, and let's pass it an argument. Now, within the function here, we're using it as a string. We can't send it as, we could send it as a bool if we wanted to, but name is going to be Nick. Then we're going to end that with a semicolon, save it, and refresh our page, and it says, hello, Nick. Now, I can call that function again and give it a different name, Charles. And now it's going to print Nick and then Charles. So as you can see, whatever we pass as the value when we call the function becomes this inside of the function. And so that's a very quick look at parameters. You can add multiple parameters, in which case you just comma separate them. So age, and then I'm going to put a comma here and a period. So we're going to end that statement and then say you are, and then their age, separated by a comma. So it says hello name, you are, age. So when we call the functions now, if I just save it and run it, it will not work because it says you are undefined because we haven't defined anything in these function calls. So let's say 28, separated by comma again, and then space 56. Save it and refresh, and you can see that it says, hello Nick, you are 28. Because we're passing both of these values in. So this becomes name, and this becomes age. You generally need to pass them in to the function in the same order that they are expected to be in, I guess, which you guys could probably guess that. So this is a quick way to add a function. We're going to be covering functions more in depth, and the main reason why we use them so that we can write out a big long function here, and then if we need to pull it off multiple times, let's say we're logging in a user, that's like a 20-line code at the so rather than logging someone in manually and writing out the code in like 10 different spots, let's just create a function and then call that function from those 10 different spots. And that's why we use functions. So in the next video, we're going to be diving deeper into functions and learning more about them. Terribly sorry, guys. I just noticed that when I switched to using this IDE, I did not change the font size so that it was really big, which I prefer to do it this way because I have a 1080 screen and you guys might be watching on a laptop or something which would have a smaller screen. So so I've made it bigger. I went back and checked and there shouldn't be a problem, but this will be more comfortable for sure. Now, what we're going to get to in this video is what JavaScript, how it can interact with the web page itself. So in one of the first videos, I was talking about what each component of web design is and how HTML is, the actual content that's on the page. CSS is how that content looks, and then JavaScript defines how you can use that content or how a user could interact with the web page, how you could modify it basically. So we're going to be getting into that today. What we're going to do is create a button. And when you click it, it's going to do something. So there's two ways to do it. But for right now, let's just go ahead in our HTML and create a button element with an ID of go-button. And the text on the button is just going to be go. So save and refresh, and there's the button right there. Now underneath the button, I'm going to skip a few lines just with a regular HTML line break. And I'm going to type in click that button. Save it, refresh. Now when I click that button, something should happen. So this is the user interaction we're talking about. When I click the button, that's the event or the user interaction. So we could also call it event handling. So when I click it, it's the event, and then we need to be able to handle the event. So we need to have an event handler. And that's where we jump over to JavaScript. So I'm going to create a function here called button clicked. And now is a good time to mention this because you guys probably saw it, and just to make sure that we're clear on this, you can't use hyphens in function names or variables in JavaScript. When we started doing CSS, I said that this is the naming convention in CSS and in HTML to separate words with hyphens. That's not the case in JavaScript. If I do that in JavaScript, it's going to freak out and it's not going to know what to do, as you can see here. So in JavaScript, you see a lot of camel case. And camel case is when the first word is all lowercase, but then after that, the first letter of each word is a capital. So that's what we're going to be doing in JavaScript, just so you guys are aware. And in this case, to make this as simple as possible, I'm just going to print out button clicked. Every time that go button is clicked, it's going to print out button clicked. So I'm going to refresh this page and hit that button, and nothing's happening. And that's because we haven't yet actually tied those two together. So we have the event handler. This is what we're going to do. And by clicking this is what's going to trigger the event, but we don't have the actual event. So there's two ways to do it. I'm going to show you guys the wrong way first, or probably the way things were done in the 90s, that I'm sure some people are still doing, and there's probably legitimate reasons. I know when using React or some framework like that, this gets used quite a bit, but for, unless you're using something like that, for right now, for what we're doing, using an on-click property is not the correct way to go about this, in my opinion. In my abstract opinion, that is the truth. So this is all one word, all lowercase, and we're going to set this property to the name of the function. So in this case, it's button clicked. And when you create an event trigger like this and the actual event, you do need to put the brackets at the end. So this is just like calling a function in JavaScript. So I'm going to hit save and we're going to refresh. Now what happens when I click that go button? This says button clicked. And each time I press it, it's going to say it over and over again. So that's the wrong way. Let's go do it the right way. In my opinion, all JavaScript should be handled within JavaScript. That's all. Now, the first thing we need to do is to get that button, to get that go button. So this is an HTML entity or an element. We need to get that element, and we are going to store it inside a variable. So I'm going to create a variable called button, btn, and it's going to be equal to the actual element. Now, how you get an element by the ID in JavaScript is you need to access the document object, and then put a dot, and then we're going to write get element by ID. Now, as you'll notice, this is all camel case. And now this is a function of the document object. So we're calling a function here that's going to return a value. We didn't talk about returning values yet, but we're going to. Basically, whatever this evaluates to, we can reference it by using this variable in the future. So the ID of our button is go button. So we're going to do that. So what we have here is a variable now that we can use called button, and it is whatever element is on this page with an ID of go button. So for this instance, it is this button right here. Now we're going to attach an event listener. So an event listener listens for certain actions, and in this case it's going to be a click that we're listening for. Now we need to attach that to the button. So the button is an object, so we can call certain methods on it. So type btn dot add event listener, and then we're going to pass in the first variable is the string, and this is going to be click. This is the event that we're listening for on the button. And then you're going to put a comma, and the second is the actual function that's going to be called each time the event fires. So in this case, it's button clicked, but we're not going to add those two brackets there. You just type out the name of the function, not this as well, and we're going to get into how you can pass values to functions like that, but not right now. We're going to save this and refresh, and then I'm going to hit go, and we see button is clicked. Did I remove that on? Okay, cool. So it is firing from right here. We're adding that event listener. Now what you can do, and I'm going to do it in the function so that it's only going to be callable once, you can remove the event listener. So let's define button way up here. I'm going to say button, remove event listener, and we're going to remove click. So what should happen here is that there. What should happen here is that when we click the button we're going to set up the page, we're going to get the button, we're going to write our little function here, and then we're going to add the event listener. So every time we click that button, it's going to run this function. But it's only going to run it the first time, because when it does, it's then going to remove the event listener. So save it, refresh. This should only be able to fire once. As you can see, it does. So that's how you can use event listeners to work with functions, and you can tie HTML elements to certain bits of JavaScript that you want to run when those elements are interacted with. And there's a lot of other ways to do this, and this is a very specific way to do what we're doing. So we're going to be naturally discussing some as we go along, but I think this probably is just the first video that it's specific about event handling. All right, this is kind of a follow-up video. It's not going to be too long. All we're going to do is learn how to set the inner HTML of an element. And so what we're going to do is right here, I'm going to wrap this in a div and give it an element of text. So div ID text. Did I say give it an element of text? I'm going to give it an ID of text. So that way we can manipulate that. So what we're going to do is the first time the button is clicked, we're just going to set that HTML to something else. So I'm going to say document get element by ID, and the ID is text, and we're going to say inner HTML. Now this is not a method, this is a variable. So this is going to return an object. And an object has variables or methods that you can interact with. So this is a variable, and we're going to set it to don't do it. I'm going to save and refresh. And when we click it, it changes that text to don't do it. And again, we can only click the button once because we then remove the event listener. So it's no longer listening for a click event. So the event doesn't exist at that point. And this would be a property, I guess, inside of text. What we can do, we can actually log, we can log entire objects, lists, integers, etc. through the console. So I'm going to console log, and I'm going to say document get element by ID, and the ID is going to be text. So I'm just going to print out this element in JavaScript. I'm going to click the button, and what you'll see right there, that's the element. Can I store that as a variable? No. Okay, this appears actually as an element, not as JavaScript. So this is the element itself. The inner HTML is the content inside of it. Not the code, not itself, but whatever's inside of it. So that's how to access and set, I guess, inner HTML. And objects do have variables, so we will be setting variables on objects. We're going to be creating objects here pretty soon as well. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Alright guys, so we're going to talk about another basic type in JavaScript here. If you've worked at all with Python, this is called a list. If you've worked with any other programming language, it's called an array. And what it is, it's a numerically indexed list of items that we can store. So it can store any type. It can store Booleans, strings, it can even store other arrays. And we're going to get to that. That's called a multi-dimensional array. When you have an array that contains other arrays inside of it, that's called multi-dimensional. And I'll show you guys examples, but right now we're going to start off simple. What I'm going to do right off the bat is I'm going to show you guys how to make an array. It's very simple. We're going to create a variable called hobbies. And in this variable, it's going to be a list. Now, how you write the list or array is just by wrapping it in square brackets. And now we're going to basically just create a comma separated list in here of strings that are my hobby. So strings are not my hobby, by the way. My hobbies involve pizza, comma, gaming, comma, reading, programming, and music. So this is my list. I'm going to save this here. I'm used to programming in Python, so I'm going to keep calling it list, but it's actually called an array. So just, this is an array. What I'm going to do is I'm going to console log my hobbies. So you guys can see that the object is created, or not the object, the array is created, and it's going to print it out as though it were an array. So I'm going to refresh this, and as you can see here, it prints it out, it syntax highlights it, and it even gives us the ability to drop it down here and view each index of it as well. So if you have a fairly large array and you need to inspect it, you can definitely just log that to the console and then load up your page and drop it down, and you can look around in there. So there's a few things that we need to talk about regarding arrays, and one of them is the pop method of the array. And this I don't think is going to be useful right now, but just to show you guys that everything in JavaScript has it's a class, let's say. So hobbies is a class, and as a class, it has methods that we can access from it. So I'm going to save it right here. So as with any other object, you put a dot and then the method that you want to call. So in this case, it's pop. And it takes no arguments. So I'm going to save it and refresh. But what this does is it removes the last item from the array, and it prints, or it returns that item in the return statement here. So it's a bit confusing, but let me show you guys what I mean. I'm going to refresh and see it prints out music. But if I print out hobbies now, it has removed music from the list. You guys can see what happens there. It removes the last item and returns that. So if we wanted to do this, I no longer enjoy and then we're going to pop that item out. So at the point where we're going to print this or use this in another way, we can remove it at that point. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to refresh, and it says, I no longer enjoy music. And then if you were to inspect my hobbies, I no longer enjoy music. So that's the pop method. Now another one is append. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write hobbies push, and here's how you append items to the array. Let's say I picked up archery as a new hobby. I'm going to save it and refresh, and I haven't console logged that out, so I'm going to just type it here. And as you can see, archery has been added to the array here. So that's a very basic example of what you can do with arrays and why they're useful. Basically, if you have a number of items that you want to use, you can, or you want to group together, you can store them inside one variable, and then even you can access each item in the array by its index. And how we're going to do that is you just type the name of the array, in this case it's hobbies, and then you put square brackets here, and inside these square brackets you just put the number of the item you want to read. So if we count right, I'm going to print out programming here. So let's count 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the fourth item in the array. But when you're working with programming, numbers start at 0. So this is in position 0, 1, 2, 3. So if I print out hobbies 3, it's going to print out programming. Now this didn't remove it from hobbies like pop did, it just printed it out. And so that's how you can access individual items within the array. And then also, well, actually, I think that's where we're going to stop here. You know how to add new items to the array, and you know how to get out the last one. We're going to definitely follow the arrays a bit further, and we're going to learn how to slice specific items out of it. We're going to learn how to reorder it and even how to loop through it. All right, guys, so there's a few basic things that we need to learn about arrays just to be able to manipulate them properly. And one of them is this array right here that has 6 items, that has a length. And we can get the integer representation of the length by simply typing hobbies.length. And it's not a method, so you don't put the brackets at the end of it. It's just a variable. So hobbies.length is going to return 6. And that's because there's 6 items in the array. Now what you can do to get the last item of the array without, let's say this is a variable size and we don't know how big it is. It could only have 3 items in it, it could have 100. The way to figure out how to get the last item, we're going to combine this with this and a bit of math. And so we're just going to print out the last item by writing hobbies and then open up your square brackets. Now in the square brackets here, we're going to type hobbies.length. So this is automatically going to say print out hobbies 6. Now this is going to fail if we just leave it like this because again, in JavaScript, numbers start at 0. So if we were going to print out something at the 6th index here, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or sorry, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's going to say undefined because we don't have a 6th item. Well, we have 6 items. We don't have an item at position 6 here. We do at position 5. So how we're going to do this is we're going to say hobbies. We're going to open up our square brackets there, and then we're going to say hobbies.length minus 1. And this is going to print out our tree because it is the last item in the array. And so that's how you're going to get last items. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to loop through arrays. And this is going to let you inspect each item in the array and do something very specific with it. So back in our code editor here, because this is going to be multi-line, so it's not going to be something I want to do in the console there. We're going to say hobbies for each, and for each is camel cased, by the way. And we're going to open up our brackets. So this is a method. This is just a method. We're going to pass into this method the function that we want to perform. So in this case, we're going to write it in line. We're going to write function. Then we're going to open up these brackets for this function. And the items, we're not naming it because we're not calling it. We're just performing it in line. So we're going to get the item. So it's going to be pizza, gaming, reading, etc. And then the index. And this is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, right? And then after this, we add our curly brackets. So now this looks a bit different from anything we've written before, and that's because it is. Because in this function, this whole thing is one parameter that we're pushing into the function. It's called a callback, and it's what this function does when it's done. So what I'm going to do is for each item, I'm going to console log I like and then item. And then we can also print out the index. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to refresh here. It says I like pizza 0. I like gaming 1. I like reading. And then we'll continue over this for however many items this has. So that's how to loop through arrays. It's just the array name dot for each. And then this is a method, so you open up your regular brackets there and put inside a function. And in the function here, you do need to grab item and index. You don't need to call them this. You can call it I and IN. But then inside here, actually you can't use IN, right? Because that's a reserved word. You can use IE. And then you would just have to use it like that inside the function. It's still going to run the same. So you guys can make up whatever names for you want. Just like inside of a function, which I don't think we actually talked about parameters, and that's what we're going to be getting to. So this is kind of a primer for that, and we're going to be using arrays as well. Now, if you want to remove the item from the front of the array, in the last video I showed you guys the push or the pop method. This is a bit different. We're going to write hobbies dot shift. And this is, we're going to shift out, yeah, it's going to shift the first one out of it. So I'm going to save it, I'm going to refresh, and now you'll notice that the entire array has changed and removed the first item, which was pizza. So maybe I no longer like pizza. So let's console log that, because it's going to return the item that it removes, just like the pop method. Now, if you want to add an item to the beginning of the array, it's very similar. It's similar to shift. We're going to call unshift on the object. So hobbies.unshift, and we're going to add in blacksmithing. Save it and refresh. And what's going to happen here is we first create our array right here, which is all the things I like. Then we add archery to it, and then we remove pizza from it. And at the beginning of the array, instead of pushing to the end of it like we did with archery, we're pushing to the beginning of it, and we're putting blacksmithing. So I'm going to save it and refresh. As you can see here, it removes pizza, and then it adds blacksmithing to the beginning of the array. So that's, I think, all we're going to focus on in this video. In the next video, we're going to learn about removing items specifically. So if I wanted to remove programming, I can't remove the first or last item, but I can remove by the index number. And then we can also get the position of the item. So we can search the array for programming, and we'll find that it's at index number 3. And I'm going to show you guys that in the next video. Let me clear this out before we start on the next video. All right, so what we're going to do in this video is learn how to get the index number of an array, and then how we can use that. So I'm going to type hobbies. I'm going to store this in a variable. So I'm going to type index num, and it's going to be equal to our array, so hobbies. Actually, let me refresh entirely here. So we have the full hobbies list. What we're going to do is we're going to get the index number of this. So counting from 0, this will be 0, 1, 2. So this has an index number of 2 in the array, reading. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the variable index num. It's going to be equal to hobbies dot index of, and we're going to be looking for reading. So now if I type index num, it's going to return the number 2 because that is at the index number 2 inside of the array. So how we remove items from an array specifically, so if we wanted to remove item at index number 5, we could do that as well. For right now, we're going to remove index number 2. So we're going to remove reading from hobbies. And how we're going to do that is we are going to type hobbies dot splice. And now this method takes 2 parameters. The first one is the position that we start at. And so if we typed 2 here, it's going to start at reading. So this is going to be the first that it removes, and then we can remove however many numbers at that point. So if I wanted to remove just 1, we're just going to remove a reading from this list. The 2 variables that it takes in is 2 and 1. Now, let's pretend that I don't know that I'm removing index number 2. So I'm going to use our variable index num, and we're going to remove reading. Now, if I type hobbies, you'll see that that has been removed. Now, I'm going to remove gaming, programming, and music using the same method. So hobbies dot splice, and I'm going to splice from position 1, and I'm going to remove 3 items. So now if I type hobbies, we get blacksmithing and archery. This is now, these are now our hobbies. So that's how to get started with arrays. Now there's one other practical use for index of, and that's to evaluate whether or not a certain item is in the array. So let's go ahead and write an if statement, and I'm going to write this in here. And the if statement is going to be if hobbies dot index of reading is greater than -1, that means reading is in the array. So I'm going to console log, I like reading. I'm going to remove that for each. And then we're going to test another value. If hobbies.index of, let's say, sports is more than -1, that means sports is in the array, which is not. So what we're going to do is else console log not in array. I'm going to save this and I'm going to refresh it. And we'll see I like reading and then not in array, because this returns an index number that is 0 or greater. This can either be at index 0 or greater. If this is not found at all, the index of method is going to return the number -1. So we could alternatively do this to test if something is not in the array. Oops. We can say if it equals -1. I'm going to save it. I'm going to refresh, and it still says not in array. Now I used 3 equal signs here. This basically means not found. So we're checking if hobbies sports is not found. Now the reason we can do this with 2, but that would return true if this was returned. Right? So we're not comparing types in that instance, we're comparing values. And certain values can be matched across types. For instance, true and true, using the 2 equal signs. So using 3 equal signs means, does the value match and is it the same type? And so it's always safest to do this if you're looking for something specific in an application. If you're making any type of comparison that, it needs to be one or the other and it needs to be the same type, then that's when you're going to use these. And alternatively, if it's not the same type, you're going to use exclamation mark equals equals. And that's how we're going to work with that. So I think we're all done the arrays. Next, I think I'd really like to move on to classes and building objects. All right, so that is arrays, and this is a pretty good use case. If you want to basically just combine or group certain information together in one variable in a list. That's when you use arrays. Now let's say we want to have kind of an object that can have different values and different keys. So we can say the object's name is Nick, the age is whatever, and then the hobbies like that. And how we're going to do that is, let me actually drag this over to that tab right there. There we go. How we're going to do that is we're basically just going to, I think I forgot to do something actually. Oh, I was just going to finish up. Okay, before we get into objects, I apologize about that. We're going to get into interacting more with the web page first. So I'm going to jump up here, and I meant to do this a few videos ago, and then I got sidetracked by the arrays. So at least we know how to do arrays now. I'm going to create an input with the class of my input. And I'm going to close it, and I'm going to skip down a line using the BR element. Save it and refresh. There we go. So what I want to happen here is I'm going to type in something into the input, and then I'm going to get the button, and when we click the button, what we're going to do is we're going to change this text to basically whatever I type into the input. So in this case, we're learning how to interact by grabbing a value and then setting the inner HTML of an item. So when this button clicks, we don't want to do any of this. Well, let's leave the button clicked there. What we're going to do is we're going to first get this element by the class. So it's my input. So document.get elements by class name. And then the class name is my dash input. And that line right there. So this is going to get that element. Now what we can do is we can then get that value. So we need to store this in a variable. So let's create a variable called custom text. And then we're going to get the value of that by, Actually, let's do that right here. No, okay, just wait. What we're going to do is we're going to set this HTML for the ID of text. So var results equals document dot get element by ID, and it's going to be text. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say results dot inner HTML, and this is a variable that we're setting, so go equals, and then we're going to basically access whatever was typed into the input, which it's stored in the variable custom text. So this is the input field there. So what we need to do is type custom text dot value, and then semicolon. So let's save this, and I'm going to refresh the application here. I'm going to type hello world, then hit go. It says undefined. So let's open up the console there. I'm pretty sure I missed something. Text is not defined. All right. Let's console log custom text and find out exactly what I am. Oh, you know what it is? This is going to give us back a list of all elements with the class. So as you can see, it's a list here, and this one right here is at index 0. So we're getting all the elements, and it's returning as an array. So what we need to do is we need to target the first index in that array. So I'm going to refresh here, and I'm going to type something here, just gibberish. And when we hit go, it's going to grab that value, and then it's going to set it right here. Now we can go a step further. We can concatenate this to make it a little more involved. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the placeholder so that people know what to type in. It's going to be your name. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to set the HTML of results to hello and then their name. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to refresh. So I'm going to say my name is Nick. When we hit go, it says hello Nick. So that's how to grab a value from an input, and it also works on select elements and checkboxes, and as far as text areas, which we actually haven't talked about, so let's go ahead and talk about that right quick as well. I'm going to drop down here and create a text area. This is basically like a large input field for text, except it's multi-line and it follows some different rules. So as a text area, it's not like the input area in the sense that it self-closes. So I'm going to add a placeholder here. I'm going to type your message. And it closes like this. So if I save this and refresh it, we see the text area there. Now what happens if you put text between the text areas, between the opening and closing tag, is that content is pre-filled. So you guys know. How you do that with an input field is you just set the value property. So in this case, I'm going to set the value to Nick, save it, and refresh, and we get Nick pre-filled into that input. And these are things that we're going to get more into after as well. I'm trying to show you guys basic usages before we start building projects, and then once we start doing that, we're going to really expand on all the basic stuff that we learn here right now. So I'm going to give the text area a class of my text area. And in the style sheet, I'm going to style it the same as my input. So my text area. So again, what this means basically is both of these elements are going to have these styles. I'm not sure if I explained that before. Oh, yes, I did. Okay, cool. I must have explained that here, I think. All right, so let's go ahead and refresh there. Now we've got your name, your message. And this is resizable. There's a CSS property for this called resize, and we can choose either a direction or none. So I'm going to set resize to none. Save, refresh. Now you see that this is not resizable. All right, so what we need to do is we need to jump back to our JavaScript here. And instead of saying hello, what we're going to do is, actually, that's okay. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get the results of the text area. So of our text area, it's going to be equal to document dot get elements by class name my text area. And then what I'm going to do down here, I'm going to start spacing these properly. I'm going to add a line break onto this actually. So just a regular line break. You can write HTML code within text or within a string of JavaScript, by the way. It's definitely possible. So we're going to skip a line, and then we're going to say results dot inner HTML is going to be plus equal message, and then text area, which is our variable. It's going to be a list that returns with all elements with the class my text area. So we're going to target number 0 because we know that's what we need. One sec. All right. And then the value in here is just text. So I'm going to save it. We're going to refresh. I'm going to say Nick, and then my message is I like programming. And then I'm going to hit go. And we've got undefined again. So let's go ahead and let's console. Let's log out the text area. Save it and refresh. And I'm going to type Nick. Oh, oops, there we go. So we do have this. It's stored there. We could get the HTML of it. It's getting the placeholder. It's getting the text length, text content. Tag name, where is this? Oh, it is the value. Okay, sorry. Did I say text? Okay, no. Okay, so text is for elements, like for a div or a span. Inputs and text areas always use value because it's a value that you're setting. There we go. So as you can see, we can get the value of text areas, inputs, checkboxes, whatever you want to grab. That's how you can get that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say document.get element by ID, and I'm going to get the go button. I'm going to show you guys what I mean. I'm going to set it to B. So B text. Sorry, B inner text is going to say go. So this is very similar to inner HTML, which I was discussing before. The only difference is that inner text is literally only going to print out text. If there's any HTML code within an element, and I'm going to show you guys actually right now, and then we'll get on to other stuff. Let me go ahead and put a bunch of content in here. So I'm going to put a div, hi, and then a comma and a space. Now here I'm going to create a div with a class of unnecessary. And then inside that I'm going to put a span. And I'm going to say world. Now I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh it. Now the divs cause some line breaks here, obviously, but this is just for demonstration purposes. So var t equals document get element by ID. We're going to get it by text. And now I'm going to print out t.inner text, and it's going to print out just the text. And then if I go t.inner HTML, it's going to print out all of the code that is inside of that element. So that's the main difference. I think with text, I was thinking of a framework specifically that we work with the text variable inside of an object. So I apologize for that. With Textareas and inputs, it is always the value that's used to grab the actual value that's inside of that input. So thank you guys for watching. In the next video, I think we're going to start on objects, classes, and a lot of different things. Actually, I think we need to do more on functions. So we need to speak about a few different things regarding a function, which we should do in the next video, and then some other awesome stuff after that. All right, so what we're going to talk about in this video is a little more about functions, and we're going to pass parameters into a function. So right off the bat, I'm going to remove all of this because we're not going to be using any of it. Now I'm going to create a function called say something. And now when you're talking about passing a parameter into a function, basically when you call the function, you can supply data to the function, and then that data is used in the function to do whatever you're trying to do. So in this case, we're going to call this function, passing it whatever we want to say. So for instance, we would just name an internal variable here, phrase. So whatever data we pass into this is going to be available within this function as the variable phrase. So I can say console log phrase. And let's concatenate this a bit. You said, and then phrase, right, like that. So now when we call the function, and we did discuss creating and calling functions, all we need to do is say something, and then in here we put what we want to say. So in this case, it's a string that we need to pass in, so we need to use quotations there. And let's say, hello, how are you? I'm going to save this, and I'm going to refresh this. And as you can see, what happens here is by calling this, it's making this actually do that. Now, another thing I need to talk about is passing variables into functions. And so instead of having this text being passed in as a string, what I'm going to do is create a new variable called p, and it's going to be, this is a phrase. And then here, we're going to pass that variable in. So the flow of this is going to be, this is defined, the console doesn't read it or anything or do anything with it. It sets the variable, and then we call this function and pass the parameter p into it. So at this point, this goes up here and it says, okay, you want to call this and put that data inside this function as phrase. And then it runs what's in here. So if I save this and refresh this now, it's going to say, this is a phrase. Now, another thing that you can do with functions that's useful is to return something. So let's say we want to create a function here called getPhraseLength, and we're going to pass in a phrase to this method. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to determine the length of characters of whatever variable we pass in, and then we're going to return that. Now, it's not going to print it out, it's not going to do anything with it, it's just going to return to wherever it was called. So the best way to describe this, or actually to demonstrate this, is to show you guys exactly what we do here. So the phrase, let's create a variable called L, and the L, it's an abbreviation, or rather an acronym, single letter acronym for length. And we're going to say phrase.length. So now L is equal to phrase.length within this function. When you create a variable inside of a function, it's only available within that function. And that's called variable scoping, and we'll get into that more later. Just know that down here I wouldn't be able to, console log L. If I do that, it's going to say that it's undefined because L has not been defined where this can read it because this function hasn't run. And even if it does run, it's still only available inside that instance of the function. So what we need to do is we need to return L. Now I'm going to save this, and if I just call the function get phrase length, and I pass in, this is a slightly longer sentence, and I'm going to save this and refresh, and nothing happens because we're not telling it to do anything. All we do is behind the scenes, we're returning the length of that phrase to this point in our code. But it doesn't do anything. It just puts it there. So what we can do is we can put this into a variable called var this length. It's going to be equal to get phrase length, blah, 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 blah. So then this is going to automatically become just an integer that we return here. So I'm going to console log this length, and we'll get into the this keyword later. I generally like to not use it, but this length just was the first thing that came to mind. It's a variable name at this point. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to show you guys what's going to happen, then I'm going to run down through and explain a little more. So it just prints out the number 34. So what happens here is when we refresh, what happens is the interpreter says, okay, this function is here. Okay, this function is here. Let's create a variable called this length, and this function, and then it refers back to this, the interpreter does, and then it passes this value in through here, and then it starts processing the function. So it says, okay, let's create a new variable called L, and L is equal to the length of the phrase. In this case, it's 34 characters. So it says, okay, return the number 34, or whatever the length is, to wherever the function was called. So then this statement essentially becomes the same as this. So now when we print that out, it prints 34. So this just becomes whatever the return value of it is. And that's how to return things from functions, and also using parameters in functions. If this looks complicated, it's not. I think I've explained it in the best way that I can. Again, the best way to really sink this in is to open up a code editor and print this out and then play with it, and then write your own code using the same concepts in my code here. And then you can start to see what's actually happening and how you can manipulate the content and the code and make certain things happen. In the next video, we're going to be discussing functions even a little bit more. All right, guys. So in this video, we're going to follow along the functions section here, and I'm going to talk about multiple values and a quick, dirty way to have however many values you want. So what we're going to do is first, to pass multiple variables into a function, it's literally as simple as putting a comma and then defining the second piece of data, or the second parameter. So in this case, get phrase length is going to take phrase and another. So what we're going to do is we're going to add both of these lengths together. So I'm going to create two variables. I'll use this for one. So P1 is going to be equal to that, and then var P2 is going to be equal to, this is a shorter sentence. And then when we call the get phrase length, we're going to pass in both. So I'm going to save this, and now I'm going to refresh, and it still says 34 because we still only do this. So what we're going to do is phrase length plus another dot length. So we're going to save that. Now we're going to refresh, and it's going to say 61. So this is the total length of both of these strings here. And that's how to do two parameters. Now, what happens if I just pass one into that function? When we refresh, it can't get the second one, so it's going to fail because we assume that that parameter is being passed in. Now, if I remove this, save it, and refresh, it works just fine. And that's because this second parameter, as long as we don't reference it within this function, we could do something like this. If type of another doesn't equal undefined, then we can do L plus equals another dot length. And then save this. Now we're going to pass in P2 after we put a comma in that method call here. And I'm going to save it and refresh, and now we get 61. So type of is a way to check the type of something. So if I say type of this, it's going to say object because that's how we create an object, which we're going to get to in the next video. If I say type of this, it's going to say object as well, even though it's an array. If I say type of that, it's going to say number. It's going to say the same thing for a float and a string. So as you can see, type of. Now, if I say type of VF, without putting this in quotations or anything, it's assumed that this is a variable, as you can tell here, and we haven't defined that variable. So type of a variable that hasn't been created is going to return as a string representation of undefined. So that's how we can check going into this method if type of and then another does not equal undefined as a string. So again, when you're using comparisons, this means not. And by using not equals equals, it means it is not the value and not the type. So this is a string that represents the word undefined. If we don't pass that in, I'm going to save it and refresh. It just prints out 34 and it skips over this because this type of returns undefined. So then this doesn't even run if it's undefined. So that's a bit more about, I guess, variable error checking, I guess, or rather existence, checking the existence of something, specifically a variable, and making sure it's not undefined before using it, which shouldn't really be necessary, except in this case where I'm trying to call it with only one parameter. Now, in the next video, we're going to get to objects, and I think this is the end of the functions, at least for now. All right, so we're going to discuss two final things about functions in JavaScript, and that's going to lead us into talking about objects. So, with functions, we've learned how to return values, how to just process stuff, and then also how to request and also send through in a function call parameters. One last thing that we need to discuss is that you can have nested functions, and so I'm going to go ahead and create a function called print both. And in here, we're just going to console log phrase and another concatenated into one. So console log phrase another. There we go. So at this point, what's going to happen, as you guys can see that we've created the getPhraseLength method. Let's actually change this to getPhrase. and then print both. Now, what's going to happen is, let's say I pass in P1 and P2. Let's just save this and refresh for now. It's going to say get phrase length is not defined because we changed the method name. Let's name this computed, because that makes a little more sense. Then let's refresh there. And it still does the same thing. This is a slightly longer sentence, so it prints out the first one. Let's remove that. So what it does is it first gets the length of the first phrase, and then if the second parameter is not undefined, then it's going to add the second parameter's length to the first one. We declare a function, and then we return the length. So I'm going to save this, and refresh, and as you can see, we get 61. Not sure why break is pointed in there, or printed in there, but yeah. So we've created a function inside a function, and we're going to use that. So if I were to access this like this, and say print both, save it, it doesn't do anything. And that's because the function there is scoped. If I tried to print it as a variable, also, let me go ahead and return, save, refresh. Hold on. That's what I want to do. So if you think that I would be able to access that method in any way from outside the getPhrase function, that's what I'm demonstrating that you cannot do. So in this instance, what you can do is we're not going to try and access the method when we call the method. Okay, we can't do that, but we can access the method from within the method. So I'm going to space there and then another. So we're concatenating these two phrases into one. We're separating them by a space. So what we can do is in the getPhrase method, we can then return print both. So I'm going to save this now, and I'm going to refresh. As you can see, we've returned from a nested function the value of this nested function to wherever we call getPhrase. So again, we're going to go down here and kind of see what's happening. Let me remove some of that. All right, so we define this method, and then let's not worry about that right now. And then we define a parameter 1 and a parameter 2, and then we set computed, which is a variable, equal to getPhrase, and we pass in parameter 1 and parameter 2. So at this point, what this does is it jumps back up here, it reads this function, says, okay, inside the function parameter 1 is going to be phrase, and parameter 2 is going to be another, and then it starts processing. So we get the length of the item. If this isn't defined, we add that length, and then we declare another function called print both. Now, it doesn't do anything until we call it. So here down here, we return print both. So then it jumps back up here. It's like, okay, well, this is actually what I should return. So I'm going to return that here, which is going to return it here. And then we're going to console log it. So this does have real world applications. And that's if, for instance, you inside of a function need to perform some computation on multiple bits of data. You don't want to rewrite that code. The point of programming is to write once. I mean, that's functional and object-oriented programming. Procedural programming, procedural programming is when you don't use functions or objects, really, and that makes it a little more complicated because every time you want to do something, you have to write it out wherever you are in the code. So that's why we use functions. Same thing here, it's just this is slightly smaller scope. Now what happens if we don't want to pass in that variable, but we want to pass in that variable? So what we'll do is we'll take parameter 2, we'll pass that in. In Python, you can do something like this. It's called keyword arguments. And you can type another equals and then that. So I'm going to save it and refresh. And let me actually return all. So we're not going to be printing both for this. We're just returning the length, and we get 27. Yeah, so this length is 27. This length is 34, I believe it was. So we can see that setting another to parameter 2 it's not doing anything. It's still passing that in as phrase. So what, and also you think, okay, well, phrase needs to have something, so we can set a default argument of null. Set that. We get a red underline. Now you can definitely do this in Python, and that's part of the reason why Python is such a beautiful language, but we're not learning Python right now, so we need to figure out how to do this and how to make parameters and functions more flexible. And we're going to do that by using an object. So in the method call right here, how we create an object in JavaScript, you just open up your curly braces like that. And now you can make a list, which is kind of like an array. It's going to have a key and a value. So in this case, we're going to set phrase, colon, and then we're going to set that to P1. Put a comma, and then another is going to be set to P2. There. This right here, that's an object that has a key and a value, and then another key and another value. So I'm going to save this. And what we'll need to do at this point is remove both of these, and we set the incoming the parameter that's incoming to obj. Actually, no, that's let's set it to params. And then in here, we could access params.phrase and then params.another. Now, if we only wanted to get the length of another, what we have to do, we also have to change this to params.another. Remove that method altogether. That's just making things look more complicated. So let's go ahead and save this and refresh, and we get 62. And that's because what's happening now is this method is like, okay, we're going to take in one parameter called params. So L is going to be equal to params.phrase.length. So this is going to be passed in like this. The parameter 1 is going to become params.phrase inside this function. And then we check if params.another is not undefined. And if that's not undefined, then to the L variable, we add params.another.length. And that's going to add the length of this, because inside the function, this is going to be referred to as params.another. So the whole object is going to be referred to as params, and then to access values within an object, you just put dot and then the name of the value that you want to use. So at that point, we are creating both. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass an empty string into phrase. So the only value we are passing in at this point is another. Going to refresh and we get 27. So that is the correct answer that we're looking for. That's the value of that. Now, additionally, I'm going to save this and refresh, and undefined is, params phrase is undefined, so it's going to freak out here. It doesn't know what exactly we're talking about. So we can say if params.phrase we're going to do this. Now the only problem is if params phrase does not exist, then we're not creating a variable because it creates it at this level. So what we need to do at the very top of a function is we declare our variable just like that. We don't assign a value to it yet, we just create it. What we're going to do is use this variable like that. So if params.phrase, then this is going to become that. And then if another is not undefined, then we're going to add that. So I'm going to save this and refresh. We get not a number. That's because that technically does exist. Let me do this. If type of params.phrase doesn't equal undefined, save it, refresh, we still get not a number. It's because we didn't set a number. So it wasn't set to become a number, and it didn't become a number here. So when this tries to add a length to this, it wasn't a number, so it couldn't do that. So that's a little bit about objects, and we're going to be jumping more into objects in the next video. All right, guys, I know we haven't actually done anything useful in the web page for a little bit, and it's going to be a little bit longer because we need to talk about a few more JavaScript things first. So think of JavaScript like a programming language. There are objects, functions, variables, and a lot of other built-ins that we're going to discuss as well. We're going to, in this video, we're going to create a simple function that's going to get a missing number from an array. So, project time. If you guys want to pause this video and attempt that right now, that's probably not going to work, actually. I don't think we've talked about sorting arrays. So that's something we're going to do right now. So first we need to create an array. So variable numbers is going to be a list. And we're going to put them in a jumbled up order. So 43, 56, 601, 100, 45, 10, 58, and 34. So this is a jumbled up list or array. And we can use the sort method. I'm going to save this and refresh the page. We're going to do this in an interactive way. We have numbers here. You can go numbers dot sort, and it's a method. So you write it like that. Now, there is a problem with this, and this is that it's going to sort as a string. So let me create words. We're going to say apple, pear, cocoa nut. Probably spelled that wrong. Pizza, I guess it's not just going to be fruits, it's going to be foods. Hamburger and banana. Now, this is going to sort it correctly because it's going to do an alphabetical sort. Now, if you know how to alphabetize stuff, and I'm going to assume that you do, it first looks at all the first letters and it arranges them. And when it gets here, it's going to see there's two items with the beginning letter P, so it's going to move on to the next one, and it's going to say, okay, E comes before I, so pear is going to go before pizza, and it continues on. Let's say the first 5 letters of a word are the same, it's going to move on to the 6th to determine the direction that it should be sorted. So that's not just on. That doesn't only relate to JavaScript, that relates to alphabetizing in general. So I'm going to refresh this, and we have words here. So if I type words.sort, and the sort method is available on all arrays. So this is an array method. It's built in, and it automatically is available. So when I do this, it sorts it correctly because it's doing an alphabetized sort. So when we're using numbers, it's trying to do the same thing. So if we see here, 100 is put before 34 because 1 is smaller than 3, and so on. So that's, as you can see, this is doing it wrong. So we need to supply a parameter to the method in order to properly sort numbers, and it's a function parameter. So I'm going to go ahead and write numbers.sort and then open up the parentheses. Now in here we're going to write a simple function that takes A and B and we return A minus B. or b minus, it's a minus, okay, let's just go do it. So pass in function. This function takes a and b, and then we open up the curly braces and we say return a minus b. I'm gonna, I don't need to save that. I forgot I'm working in the interactive console here. So when I hit enter, it's going to properly sort the numbers. So that's how you numerically sort an array. It's just a simple line of code here. So what we're going to do, pause the video now. I want you guys to create a list with a range of numbers, let's say 1 to 20, just for simplicity. I don't want to have you guys create like this full-on array of numbers that's like 100 indexes or so. So just a list from 1 to 20, and then make one number that should be in that list not in that list. So let's say the missing number would be 6. So you guys are going to, in your code editor, you're going to create an array with a missing number, and you're going to write a function that's going to determine what the missing number is. Now, the array should have sequential numbers. So your list, including the missing number, should look something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9. But I want you to put it in a jumbled up order. So it would look something like 9, 7, 2, 3, 5, 6, etc. And then you would just make sure that one number was not in there. All right? So I'm actually going to write down a list that I'm going to be using so that you guys can write the same thing, just in case I didn't explain that well enough. Let's remove the words, and let's start writing the list. So do we have 5 in there? Nope. Do we have 2? No. All right. I already put 6 in there. So 16, 18. This is going to be a little more confusing than I thought. All right. Where's that comma? All right. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. All right, so these are all our numbers. Now I'm going to select one at random here. And just to make sure these are correct and that they're sequential numbers, I'm actually going to refresh the page here, and I'm going to write numbers.sort 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 18, 19, and 20. All right, so we're missing the number 4, and we have 18 in there twice. So I'm going to remove an 18. There, our missing number is 4. Pause the video, write this list out like this. It's going to be a lot easier. And then write that function that determines the missing number. And then when you're done, proceed on to the next video. All right, guys, good stuff. Hopefully you guys managed to do that. If not, it's okay. If you did, good job. It probably took you multiple times, unless you come from a programming background and have a history of writing algorithms. This is a very simple one. And so if you want to see my take on it, keep watching. If you did it successfully, then you don't have to watch this, but if you do want to, then go for it. I'm going to create a function first, obviously, that's going to compute this. So function, I need to actually target my editor, function, and I'm going to call it missing number, and we're going to pass in numbers. So what we're going to do is I'm going to set a missing number variable. So var missing, right now it's going to be set to -1. Then what we need to do is we need to get the last index of the array, and then the first one, and we loop through until we find the missing number. So we're going to use a for loop. We're going to set I equal to numbers dot 0. It's going to be the first. Actually, we're just going to set it 0. This is going to exist until I is less than, or as long as I is less than or equal to numbers dot length. And then at the end of each loop, we're going to say I plus plus. So this is our loop. It's going to run 19 times, and it's going to find the missing number. So what we need to do is just check if this I is in the numbers array, then pass. Otherwise, if it's not, return that it's not. So we're going to be using index of. So if numbers index of I is going to be equal to -1, which means it is not found in numbers. We set missing equal to I, and then down here we're just going to return that variable. It's literally that simple. Let's save it, and we need to now call it down here. So missing no, and we're going to pass in numbers. Save it, refresh. I need to call that. I need to log that actually. Console log. And remember that our missing number was 4, and it found it correctly. So I'm going to walk you guys through this a little bit more. This actually isn't created, so there, let's get that looking a little better. All right, so we have a list from 0 to 20, and it's missing the number 4. So the length of this is 19, but if all numbers were there, the length should be 21. Or sorry, the length is 20, but the length should be 21 because we've got 0 in there as well. We don't need to use the sorting that I explained in the last video, but that's another way to do it. It's more it's simpler, but it's a lot more code. So if you guys did it that way, then good stuff. What I've done here is we pass this jumbled up array that's missing one number into this function, and we set missing to -1, and this is just basically for it to have a default state, and -1 is nowhere in here, so it's kind of irrelevant. If this were to return as -1, we would know that no number is missing. So for instance, if I put 4 in there and save it, refresh, this is going to return as 21 because 21. All right. Where we've got 0 in there, I need to do this. This is going to make it run 20 times. So I'm going to save it and refresh, and we get -1. So that's because it didn't find the number, and that's why I put that there. Let's take out the number 15, run it once more, save it and refresh, and we get 15 there. So what happens if we create our loop, we use the lowest number in the array, and if we didn't know how many items were in the array and where to start, what the first number was, let's say it started at 3, we should be doing it this way. So we are going to sort it for this case. Our sorted equals numbers.sort. And then in order to sort numerically, we have to write that little A, B code here. And we return A minus B. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the default I value as sorted 0. So let's remove the numbers 0, 1, and 2. So now the array starts at 3. I'm going to save it and refresh, and it still returns 15. And that's because this starts at 3 as well. So it goes from 3 until the item is, the last item in the array. So anywhere between that range, we can do this. And then what we do is we check if the array here has this sequential number in it, or rather doesn't have it, then we set missing to that, because we know that I here is counting sequentially. We know that's always going to be true. So this is going to have every number between 3 and 20. That's just the case. That's just the way it is. So then what we do is we just set missing equal to that number, and then outside of that loop, we return the missing number. So, good job, guys. This is a little bit more complicated, and this is the kind of problems we're going to get into solving more. If this seemed hard to you, don't worry about it. I'm going to make it so that stuff like this is not difficult, and you're going to be able to figure this stuff out pretty quickly. And you're going to know how to actually. Figuring this out, figuring out what you need to do is a very small part of this. Knowing what kind of loops and what methods to run in JavaScript to solve this problem, that's what I'm going to, make sure that you guys are comfortable with doing. So in the next video, we're going to get more into objects and the different ways we can create those and work with those. We're all classy people, and so is JavaScript. So if you come from a programming background, then you're going to be familiar with classes and what they do. But if you're not, or even if you just need a primer on the subject, a class is a blueprint that you can create objects from. And we can in the class, we can define certain functions and variables that each object created from that class will have and will have access to. So classes in JavaScript were not supported before ECMAScript 2015, which is a specification, which is just a series of rules that are official, that browsers can then go ahead and say, yeah, we'll write support for that into our JavaScript interpreter. So what we need to do is also discuss what browsers are supported and why. So Chrome, I think 42 and above, Firefox 45 and above, and Microsoft Edge are all supported, and Safari as well. I think Safari 12, I could be wrong. Internet Explorer is not supported, neither is Opera, neither are those browsers before those versions. So this is not a legacy web development course. We're not going to be aiming for compatibility across Internet Explorer 6, for example, or Windows 98. That's not what this course is about. This course is about modern web development. And so one of the tools in a modern web developer's toolbox is ECMAScript 2015, like HTML5. Now, if you guys do want to learn about legacy web development, that might actually be a course I put together after this, because I love retro things and that would be fun. But aside from that, let's start using classes. Let me analogize this a bit. If we were to create animals, they would all have similar properties, or they would all have the same properties. So they would all have a height, width, and a weight. They may also have a volume, and then there's other specifics that not all animals have. But for all those properties that all animals do have, for instance, a weight, we're going to create that inside of the class, so that when we instantiate the class, when we create an object using the blueprint that is the class, that property will be set. So every object will have it. So to understand this better, you guys are going to have to do it and see it. So let's get started. To create a class in JavaScript, it's very similar to every other programming language. The procedure is, rather, the syntax is close to Python and C, I think C#. I could be wrong. And a few others that I have never used. So what we do is we use the keyword class, and then we give the name to our class, just like functions. So in this case, it's going to be called animal. And then you put a space and your curly brackets. Now, this is going to tell me that it's not supported by the current JavaScript version, which is wrong. That's something to do with JetBrains. If you guys get a similar error in your code editor, it is safe to ignore that as long as you are using one of the supported browsers or a modern browser. So we created a class. Now we can instantiate it, or now we can create an object that uses this class as a blueprint. So let's go ahead and create a variable called dog. It's going to be equal to the instantiation of this class. How you do that is you use the keyword new, space, and then the name of the class. So in this case, it's animal. And you use regular brackets after this, much like when you call a function. That's what this looks like. So now we've created our class and we've instantiated the class. So I'm going to save this and run it in the browser, and there are no errors. That means we've done everything up to this point correctly. So that's how to create a class. In the next video, we're going to be discussing how to run a function when the class is created, and then we're going to get into class methods, variables, etc., and then how to do stuff with it. And then we're going to do a project. So I can't wait for that. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, so what happens when we create a class and nothing happens is nothing happens. When you want to run a function as soon as the animal is created or as soon as it's instantiated here, we can have a function run when this is called, basically. And in different programming languages, it's done a different way. In Python, it's the init method. In C++ and other C languages, it's just the class name again. But in JavaScript, it's just called constructor. So let's go ahead and start using this. Constructor will be run every single time that we create an animal. So in this constructor, I'm just going to console log created animal. And then I'm going to save it and refresh. And you see I don't even have to call that constructor method. It calls itself as soon as the animal is created. Now I'm also going to create a fish. So var fish equals new animal. And right now, both of these instantiations look the same, and they are because they're just using a different variable name for it. So in order to make this more unique, we're going to start passing parameters into the constructor. And this is just done like any other method call where you pass parameters in, except there's one difference. You may think that you're going to be passing the parameters into the class, but you're not. When you write out the instantiation of a class, you put these brackets here, and basically whatever's in here goes to the constructor method. So if we're going to pass in name, height, and weight, because these are all properties that all animals have, then in the instantiation here, I'm going to say the dog's name is Fido. His height is 25 inches and his weight is 90 pounds. So he's a very short, heavy dog. And then the fish, let's say his name is Goldie. He is, I've never had a fish, so I don't know the standard height and weight. I'm going to say 2 inches, and his weight is going to be 0.02 pounds. I'm not sure. Anyway, that's what we're passing in, so that's that's his height and weight. Not sure if that's realistic or not, that's all. So, when I save this, I'm going to actually change the console log that runs in the constructor so that we can see the data that's coming in. So, for right now, I'm just going to make it say created animal named, and then the name that we pass in there. So, I'm going to save it and refresh it. And as you can see, it uses the parameter name as we've told it to do. So you can see that the parameters are being passed from the class instantiation right into the constructor. And that's how that works. Now, let's say we want to get the length of their name. So I'm going to create a class method, or an instance method, rather, that's called how long is, or rather, name length. And this is going to be a problem because we can't access the name here. Let's go ahead and try to return name.length. Save this. And down here on the dog object, I'm going to call it console log dog.nameLength. Whoops. There we go. I'm going to save it and I'm going to run it. And we know that the length of the dog's name is 4, not 0. So what's actually happening here is even though we passed these values into the constructor, they're not yet usable by the entire object. They're only usable right now within the constructor. Now, to declare instance variables or variables that any method can be used or can use it, we need to use the this keyword. Now, this refers to the object itself. So it refers to dog and fish, the two different objects that are created here. So this dot name equals name. This dot height equals height. And this dot weight equals weight. So we're taking these parameters that are only usable in the constructor and we're creating properties of the object itself. So now the object has a name, the object has a height. So we can use that in other methods. So I just changed this to this.name.length. Now let's go ahead and save this and run it again, and now you will see that Fido's name is 4 characters long. If I run it on fish instead, it's going to return 6. Now, we can also define static variables. So these are going to be unique for each object created from this class. Each object is going to have its own name, height, and width, or weight. And that's just the way that works, or rather, that's the way that this works. You can create a variable that is going to be instantiated for this class that will not depend, or it won't be unique to a given object. It will always be the same. So, in this case, what variable could I attach to that? That would be the same for all animals. I know. So I'm going to say animal, and this is outside of the class, by the way. I'm going to say animal dot planet equals Earth. So now what this does is by doing this outside of the class, it doesn't matter if this or this is created. Dog.planet is going to be Earth, and so is fish.planet. So let's print out dog.planet. Save and refresh, and it is undefined. So let me have a look here. Let me just print out dog. Let's inspect it a bit. Save, refresh. All right. So let me do some inspecting here. Animal planet is Earth. So dog.planet is undefined. Oh, sorry. Yes. All right. So to call class level variables instead of instance variables, to access the dog's name, we would do this. And that would print out Fido. To access variables that are not unique or not instance variables, but they're class variables, we would access that by doing the object name dot constructor dot whatever the variable is we want. So in this case, it's planet. So I'm going to save this and refresh, and we have Earth. And then we can change this to fish and save and refresh, and it still prints out Earth. And that is because, again, we've created a class level variable, which is not unique to instances of the class. Whereas anything you define with the this keyword is unique to that to that. So that was a bit to sink in. I hope you guys had an easy time understanding that. This is one of the things that when I was starting with object-oriented programming, and maybe I just didn't have the right information, but this confused me a bit, constructors and instance variables and class variables. So hopefully I explained that well. Let me know if I did or I didn't, or if you want any other information or have any questions about this. All right, guys, so I hope you've been playing around with classes a little bit and have figured some stuff out about it that maybe I haven't mentioned. If you come from another programming background, then that's most likely going to be the case, and you probably have a pretty good idea on how to do numerous things involving classes and objects. For everyone else, and even just as a primer, what we're going to be doing in this video is extending classes, and this means we're going to subclass them. So I'm going to be creating a couple new classes that are going to extend the animal class. So when we think about certain animals, let's say there are distinct differences between fish and dogs. For instance, dogs can bark, so they obviously have a bark volume. Dogs wear leashes, so their leash must have a color. And fish swim. So they must have a swim speed, for instance. Now, obviously, these things could be processed in a more vague way, and let's say the speed, the swim speed, could actually just be called speed because dogs also have a certain speed that they move at. However, for the sake of this video, we're going to be creating two new classes. So let's go ahead and extend the animal class. So how we do that, we type the keyword class. So we're creating a new class. The new class is called dog. Now, in order to inherit all of this from the animal class, we then put extends animal. So there we go. We have a class named dog. Now, I'm getting sick of these warnings. I'm probably going to try a different code editor at some point to see if we can get these to go away. So basically what we do here is we're going to create a constructor, and it's going to take all the same data and then some. So let's go ahead and create the constructor method. So we're going to take name, height, weight, bark volume, and leash color. So at this point, in order to instantiate this object as an animal and have access to all these properties and methods that are in the animal class, we need to call what's called a super constructor. How we do that is it's a keyword. You just type in super. And in here, essentially, it's the same as writing animal. So we're going to just pass in the same values that we would pass into the animal's constructor, which would be name, height, and weight. And this is what I mean by I hate these lines. It says superclass constructor invocation should be in constructor body, which is strange because that's exactly where it is. However, I want to make sure that's indented properly. There we go. So then once we get that created, then the dog object that we create has a name, height, and weight. But we're also going to give it a bark volume and leash color. So let's set this dot bark volume equals bark volume. And then this dot leash color equals leash color. So at this point, the dog has a name, a height, a weight, a bark volume, and a leash color. So I'm going to create a method here that we're going to be calling, and let's call it bark. What we're going to do is, depending on the volume level, which is going to be between 0 and 1, it's going actually 0 and 100. That makes makes it easier. What we're going to do is if it's above a certain amount, it's going to bark loudly. Otherwise, it's going to bark quietly. So if it's over 50, it's going to be a loud bark. So if this dot bark volume is over 50, we're going to console log bark bark. Instead, let's type the dog barks. Actually, let's use the actual name. So this dot name barks. Hold on. Barks loudly. If it's under 50, we're gonna console log this dot name barks timidly. There we go. So now if we save this and refresh our page, we shouldn't see any errors, but we also shouldn't see anything happen yet. So we actually need to go we need to instantiate the dog, and then the dog object or the dog class will go back to the animal class and instantiate that, and then kind of combine them together. So var king equals new dog. We're going to pass in king is the name. Its height, it's a very big dog, so we're going to say it's 45 inches tall. I'm not sure if that's big or not. It's going to be 92 pounds. It's going to have a bark volume of 72 and a leash color of red. And in here, I'm going to put the volume. This dot bark volume there. And I'm just going to copy and paste this into the next line as well. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say king.bark. So I'm going to save this and refresh it. It says king barks loudly. As you can see, the constructor of the parent class is being invoked here. If I remove this and save it and refresh, as you can see, it's giving us an error. So that's why we need to call this super constructor, and then everything works well. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go extend the animal class again. So I'm going to say class fish extends animal. Now the same thing in here, we're going to create a constructor. It's going to take in a name, height, weight, and a swim speed. So again, we need to call super with the name, height, and weight. And then we're going to set this swim speed equals swim speed. And then we're going to create a method here called swim. Now, if the swim speed is above 50, he's going to swim around fast. Or quickly. So if this dot swim speed is higher than 50, we're going to console log the name. So this dot name swims around quickly. Speed is going to be this dot swim speed, and then we're going to close that. If it's not above 50, we're going to console log this dot name. So it's going to print out the fish's name. Then we put a comma. Swims around slowly. And we're going to say speed is going to be equal to this dot swim speed. We're going to print that out here. No, I can't use plus signs because that's going to try. Oh yeah, I can. Okay. Should work. I've been working in Python a lot lately, so. What we're going to do now is we're going to create Goldie. It's going to be equal to new fish. The name is going to be Goldie. The height is going to be 2 inches. Weight is going to be 0.1 pounds. I'm not sure if that's reasonable. And the swim speed is going to be 43. And then under the dog barking is going to scare the fish. And so Goldie is going to swim. I'm going to save this and refresh. And as you can see, it says created animal, then King barks loudly, volume 72, and Goldie swims around slowly. Now this, we can give Goldie a better chance of surviving if we make him swim around quickly. So let's go ahead and change the swim speed to 77. Save it and refresh. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of do a calculation here, and if the fish swims quicker than the dog is able to run, and we're going to determine that based on their size, so 45. So we're just going to do a simple comparison here. So in the swim method, we're going to pass in king.height. And then in here, we say chaser height. That's what we're going to pass in there. And if this dot swim speed is greater than chaser height, actually, you know, let's use speed. Let's give the dog speed too. Okay, so he has leash color and speed, and then this dot speed is going to be equal to speed. So we're going to come down here and we're going to give the dog a speed of 52. And we're going to say king.speed here. So change this to chaser speed, and we're just going to compare the two speeds. So if this dot speed is greater than, this dot swim speed is greater than chaser speed, we console log the name. So this name got away. Else, we're going to console log was caught. All right, so let's save. Let's go ahead and refresh. What we should have now is a method that says Goldie got away. All right, so King barks loudly, Goldie swims around quickly, and Goldie got away. Now, if we change the speed to less than the dog's speed, so 46, I'm gonna save it and refresh. And because Goldie swims around slowly, he is caught. So that was a neat little mini game kind of thing, or little program that we built. That was fun. But as you can see, we can extend animals. We can extend any class, really. We could even extend a dog and create a a Labrador if we wanted to. You can continue extending classes and subclasses however far you want. So that was how to extend classes.